did you go to school?
What do you think of what's going on right now, mate?
These evil little invisible parasites.
Satan-worshipping Freemason moron.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
We're not run by factions.
Get the fuck out of camera!
There are much more powerful international forces in play.
Is this pink guy? Is this what pink guy is? I don't fucking know what's happening.
Please go outside and look at the mini quickly.
It's been crazy, guys, but guess what? It's how it is, mate.
Mate, because I want to do you slowly.
But I ain't spending any time on it.
Welcome to the Conditional Release Program, a podcast that delves into the netherworld of cults, crims and con artists. I'm Jack the Insider, otherwise known as Peter Hoysted for tax purposes.
And I'm Joel Hill, and this week we are looking at the shady as fuck private military contractor Wagner Group and its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin. Is that right? That's how you say it?
Yevgeny Prigozhin, yes.
So this is basically a Russian mercenary group that has exploited internal unrest in countries in Africa and the Middle East to relieve them of their oil, gold and gas, which is money basically, but they're doing them a favour.
Yeah, South America too.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to money in the end. Money and power. But what happens when idiots have all the money and the power? Well, lots of people tend to die.
Yes, they do, yes.
And this time it culminated in what is being called by many as a coup attempt, but by experts as a mutiny. I would say failed insurrection, but I'd call it a little bit brave and a lot of very, very stupid. Prigozhin sent his poorly paid mercenaries, some of them just released from prison on murder blues, to Moscow to fuck with Putin in his fancy digs at the Kremlin, or his dasher between the Kremlin and St. Petersburg. We've all heard of suicide by cop, but this is suicide by president.
It really is.
And a nasty one at that.
Yeah, it really is. Don't go. He's got a gun. Yeah, he does. Like 15,000 of them. So, yeah, the Wagner Group almost made it to Moscow. They really did. It was wild scenes. But the Wagner Group is interesting in itself. It has a history of denial. But not only that, the reason it's named the Wagner Group is after Richard Wagner, the famous composer who wrote that big, long opera about rings, the Nibelungs and whatnot. I don't know. But it's also a massive fucking Nazi.
Yeah.
And it's believed that one of the Wagner Group founders, Dimitry Utkin, was not only a big old Nazi, but liked to show off about it with a big old bunch of Nazi tattoos. And he liked Wagner because of his music, but also his distaste for Jews. And I'm not sure which one of those is more motivating for him. You know, one or two.
One of those hand-in-glove things. And why the fuck does it keep coming back to Nazis, Joe?
Frustrating.
Didn't we do that already? Isn't it done now? Can we move on from fucking Nazis, please?
I don't understand.
Now, moving very bloody far away from Nazis at the top of the show, we are going to be more like Wagner. Well, more like Simeon Boykov and ask you for money.
Again.
But unlike Boykov, we aren't going to spend it on Twinkies and car repayments.
No.
Well, not car repayments. Simeon gets a car and doesn't repay.
No, he doesn't make car repayments. No, he's not famous for it. No, it's in public record that he doesn't, though.
No, so we are asking. We have got the begging bowl out because we've got a very good cause. So please get your wallet out and tap in some digits to build a house in Vanuatu. Yes, it's a bit of a random ask, but it's good and it's legit.
Yes, it comes from trusted sources. And, of course, while you're at it, go buy some beer. Not just any beer, CB Co beer, the official beer of the Conditional Release Program. I am trying to create a Pavlovian response where every time you hear a chin crack in the podcast, or basically any time in your life, you think of CB Co.
I'm salivating right now, but then I normally do.
Yes, exactly. Well, I'm going to make this happen because I'm going to fucking train you for it. So even better in this situation, every time you hear a tin crack, you blindly walk into a bottle-o and you buy some of their delicious beer and you keep our sponsorship happening.
Beer.
Must have Australian IPA. And this is just to hear the tin crack. And the great thing about this is that while the tin crack is the only thing that now makes you feel emotions, the tin cracks are really satisfying because CB Co carbonate their beer to a degree that beer should be carbonated.
All right. Jesus
beer
Christ,
should be carbonated.
Jesus Christ.
So the tin cracks are satisfying.
Did you just turn an actual charity into a plug for your beer sponsor?
Yes, I did. And I'm totally fine. Am I going to hell for that?
Yeah, no, look, you can put $50 into our Vanuatu fund and you might buy yourself out of eternal pineapple penetration in the fires of hell.
Ah, like an indulgence, a Catholic indulgence. Cool.
There
so
you
look,
go.
We won't beg you for money this episode because we'd rather you give it to our mates across the pond in Vanuatu. But don't you worry, we will be back with that hat out soon.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, we will. Look, that's just normal. And as for the recent pause in programming, Joel was to blame at first. Apparently, he was working very hard.
I was.
He was just telling me all about how hard he was working.
Labouring, blah, blah, blah.
And he got a cold, which to me sounds like a poor excuse for a man with no work ethic and vaccine-induced AIDS. And
I mean, that's how you get the cold.
Pete Evans did try to warn you about that, Joel.
Fair. Yeah, fair.
But once he snapped out of his self-induced coma, something very shitty happened. My mother passed away.
Yeah,
there's been a mixture of grief and admin as I balance the emotional impact of losing my mother with the absolute horror of dealing with all the admin. Funeral directors, celebrants of life, are needy bastards. But most of it should be wrapped up in a week or so, and we can get on with things. Onward and upward.
Yeah, that's the spirit. Now, look, I know it was coming, but still condolences, man. I really do. It sucks. And I'm a little bit angry because she did die minutes before we were about to record this episode, the last time.
Literally 5 minutes, yeah.
Fucking so quickly. But look, I think that was a touch and considerate, but at the same time, I can't stay angry at her because she made you. And I think all of our podcast listeners can say a very big thanks to Mother Hoisted for making you, because the podcast wouldn't have happened without her. So we have her to thank for this episode, and all the other ones.
No, the 50's not going to do it anymore. You're going to have to throw in a bit more than a 50 to stay away from pineapple hell.
I tried to soften the joke, it didn't work. Oh well, on with the show.
On with the show. Now, many of our listeners will know of Rob, and we interviewed Rob on one of the programs. He was a survivor of child sexual assault from a teacher at Trinity Grammar in New South Wales, and all of the difficulties that Rob experienced as a result of that trauma was amplified by the school being pretty bloody hard-assed about any form of compensation, declaring it wasn't their responsibility. He was abused off campus, all this kind of stuff.
The episode is well worth
oddly enough, got through the New South Wales Supreme Court. Now, Rob is a good mate of mine. I've got to know him very, very well after he told me his story a number of years ago. And he and I remain in touch. And he got hold of me and said, "Hey, Jack, I'm on a fundraising drive to help my best friend of 30 years in Vanuatu, Joe Gibson, build a proper safe home for him and the rest of his family." And he just goes on to say that Joe and me met when I got talking in the grounds of a resort. After 5 minutes, he said, "You're the first white guy who ever said more than a hello or a good night to me."
There's a lot in that, but yeah.
Joe is a friend who taught me resilience through a lot of the dark days. He has a small block of family land, and I'm trying to raise $5,000 to get the slab, walls, and roof up. If you can help, he said, I've included the Build Joe a House account details, and thought you might pass it on to Joel or just contribute from the podcast. And that's what we're doing because we know our listeners are generous people.
That's right.
We're going to put a whole bunch of stuff on up on our Facebook page.
We'll put on
photographs of the family, photographs of the building site.
I'll put it on Twitter. I don't do Twitter anymore, but I'll do it anyway.
Yeah, I'll link from my Twitter account to the Facebook page and so forth. So you'll be able to see it. And just to give you some background, Joe Gibson in Vanuatu is 50 years of age. He's the patriarch of a family of 19, including 5 daughters, number of grandchildren. I've kind of lost count there. They all live together in what can be described as a ghetto on the outskirts of Port Vila in Vanuatu.
That's right.
They have one main room, some bedrooms built as lean-tos with sarongs hanging in doorways, their only privacy, and nothing but mud floors. No running water, no electricity.
No.
And you can imagine what it is like when it rains. And it rains a lot in Vanuatu, and they have a lot of cyclones. And that's the next point. They lost their shack during the recent cyclones and scavenged to rebuild what they could. They have no running water, no lights, and cook over an open fire. Joe walks 2 hours to work 6 days a week to the Warwickla Lagoon, which is a resort, where he plays in the band that welcomes visitors and plays a role as a tribal chief at night. He walks 2 hours home because the bus fare of about $2 each would eat into his pay, which is about, I checked this out, it's just on $2 Australian an hour. That's the minimum wage in Vanuatu.
That's like saying your bus fare
it's actually
is
the average.
$20.
It's about the average for workers, $2 an hour.
Jesus Christ. So look, as we said before, listeners may remember Jack's interview of Rob as a survivor of child sexual abuse at the hands of these fucking predatorial pedophile teachers.
Well, it's one teacher in particular, yeah.
Well, yeah, teacher. But while he was attending school at Sydney's Trinity Grammar, just attending school.
Yeah.
Sexually abused.
Going on camps at Trinity Grammar deemed was not their responsibility.
But he's also a very trusted friend of the podcast.
Look, Rob told me that going to Vanuatu was the only time he felt his PTSD lose his grip. He didn't know he had PTSD at the time, but being in Vanuatu helped.
That's fucking nice.
And Rob, as we said, has known Joe for 30 years, since one of his earliest visits to Vanuatu. Rob's aim is to build Joe and his family a concrete slab on which they can start building a house from local timber and Bessa blocks, which are used widely in Vanuatu. They've done the costings, and I've seen the costings, and reckon that will cost $5,000.
Okay.
Rob has kicked off a fund, and it is called the Build Joe a House Bank Account. It's an ANZ bank account held in Australia. We'll repeat these numbers, and we'll also put them on
we'll put in the show notes. We'll put in the social media. We'll make sure that you don't have to rely on this. But
yeah,
we'll say
you don't have to run and get a pen, but if you do,
if you've got a pen,
the BSB is 013711, and the account number is 151445656.
We'll make that more palatable.
Now, I had a look at the account and spoke with Rob today, and there's about $2,000 in it. Rob says, I already know how generous your listeners are, but I think if we can get over $5,000 and with every additional dollar, so there's $5 to give you the bare minimum. That's a roof over the head and some running water from a tank. If we go over $5, then we get a bigger tank. And if we get up towards 10, maybe some solar, maybe electricity. So this is one of these cases where just a little bit of money will do so much good.
Far.
When you look at the photos of the little kids, and there's many of them scuttling around this property, living in the barest of circumstances, I know you want to give.
I mean, look, I was reading the Peter Singer book, The Life You Saved, today because I was on the train coming up north, and it talks very much about this whole effective altruism and giving money to causes that matter. This is one that makes sense. And look, if you really dig deep and you want to get something from it, Peter Singer says you should be very, very much anonymously donating for the sake of donating. But if you want to get that bump, you want to get that joy, tell us about it, and we'll not only shamelessly broadcast your generosity on the show, but we'll just say a message if you want. We will be your whores. So if you want to throw some good money in there, send us a message and we'll just say something, just for the fun of it, because it's a quid pro quo.
We will do anything. And in fact, I'm not going to shame Joel into $50 or maybe even $100 to avoid pineapple pain.
No, I'm definitely going to be paying for that one because that joke was shit.
I'm weighing in with my funds that you, our listeners, through the Patreon, will do. And so I'm putting in a month there. That'll help. Joel can do whatever he likes. I'm not going to shame him into specialising.
The reason why I've been so late with the podcast is because we're working so much. So I do have some spare cash. I'm going to throw it in.
So we'll get it done. You can help us get this done. Like I say, $2,000 already in the bank, $5,000 required for the bare minimum. Let's see what we can do.
If we can get to 10,
a bigger tank.
What does it do in Australia?
Some solar, to light up the house.
It's a big difference for nothing.
It's such a small amount of money.
It doesn't buy you a grass patch in Marrickville, but it will change their lives. So let's just do that.
Change every single one of these 19 people's lives living under the one roof. And the one roof at the moment is literally, and you'll see it from the photos, is literally just corrugated iron that's been found from scrap after the last cyclone. So let's build them something substantial, something that will stand them, this large family of 19 people in Vanuatu. Let's build them something that can help their kids grow in a stable sort of environment. It's a loving family, but they don't have the roof over their head. So let's get it done. And that's hard.
No, okay, well, let's give these guys an opportunity because this episode is probably going to make it feel even more important because we're going to talk about poor people being exploited hard by terrible, terrible people.
Terrible people who are all billionaires.
This may very well be a prompt to take action because I'll tell you what, this episode is an amazing write and I hated doing it because it's fucked. Let's move into the deeper dive on the Wagner Group.
I still haven't worked it out yet. And if you haven't worked it out, keep asking the question and keep looking for the answers because it's irrelevant.
So the Wagner Group is a private military contractor, which is a nice way of saying basically a bunch of mercenaries. An organised bunch of mercenaries, really. Mercenaries are often seen in the movies as being sort of decked out with cool tactical gear and paid a fortune to jump into these sort of sketchy, often African war zones and kill a bunch of people for weird American interests. They're bad guys. These ones are being paid about $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
So that might give you an idea of how the quality of mercenary we're talking about here. But it's not a part of the Russian government. It's not. Well, apparently it's not.
The best way of thinking of it is that it is an international criminal cartel.
Well, yes, but also there's direct links to the Russian government. But look, we don't want to say that too bluntly because we'll get an umbrella in the armpit. So while the Americans will happily pay groups like Blackwater, who changed their name to Z and then to Academy, I mean, I can't keep up with their rebranding because but the thing is, like small massacres of civilians, they do harm to the valuable brand they have. It's a real shame. So they've got to rebrand over time. They send them out to do their dirty work. The US does this, and it's that sort of classical neoliberal privatization motive, cut costs, reduce responsibility. It's bullshit. But a little bit of torture on the side, if the mood calls for it, is nice to be able to do if you have to.
Utterly brutal.
Blackwater are fucking assholes. So let's not give them a free pass on this one. But the Wagner Group are sent all over the world into places experiencing civil unrest where they will protect government forces or maybe rebel forces from pesky rebels or pesky government for either cold hard cash, usually on the rebel side, or on the government side, lucrative cuts of natural resources, often in the form of gold, gas, even fucking timber. They take timber. They will do anything.
Wagner was founded in 2014 by Prigozhin and a bloke named Dimitry Utkin. We can say that now because it's public knowledge. Prigozhin had denied his involvement in Wagner to the point of taking legal action against investigative journalist and founder of Bellingcat, Elliot Higgins, for libel and defamation over 5 tweets that exposed him as the man behind Wagner. Got to have a reputation first, Yevgeny. Prigozhin employed a top-tier firm in London to prosecute the case, who sought to cause the journalist Elliot Higgins as much pain as possible.
That's documented.
The suit was considered a SLAP. That's called. That's an acronym, by the way. That means Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, which seeks to silence journalism and public discussion with legal bullying tactics.
Basically what happened was that he sued a journalist for libel and defamation and then later casually admitted that he was indeed a founder of Wagner.
Pride before the fall.
And when asked about why he sued journalists who suggested that was indeed admittedly true, he said, and I quote, "In any issue, there should be room for sport." I mean, what a cunt of a human being.
It's probably not the worst thing he's done, Joel. I mean, who would believe that a man who executed a soldier with a sledgehammer would not observe court orders? I mean, anyway, look, the Wagner Group found their feet during the Donbass war in Ukraine, and this is going back now several years. Actually, predates the annexation of Crimea, where they helped pro-Russian separatists.
It's 2014.
The group then moved on to a more global approach to profiting from civil unrest by taking part in the Syrian, Libyan, and Sudanese civil wars. They also caused trouble in the gold-rich Central African Republic, caused a lot of trouble there, and Mali. They're also active in South America, around Venezuela and Colombia, Joel.
Yeah, they're really adventurous. The Wagner Group is, as we said, named after the Nazi-loved composer Richard Wagner. The Nazis loved Richard Wagner. And Dimitry Utkin,
Wagner.
being a massive neo-Nazi, loved Wagner too. It was actually his radio call sign. So when people say, Wagner in, he'd say, yes, I have killed the civilians. But the thing is that Dimitry isn't just a come-and-go Nazi. He fucking loves the Third Reich. It is ridiculous how much he loves Nazism. He's said to use the symbol for the SS Nazi military unit to sign off on documents. I mean, apparently he also, unrelated, has a map of the Moscow metro on his cock. So that's nice.
That's a big underground railway system, Joel.
To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if a large cock, and anyone who goes near
He might have
wish
a
them well.
prosthesis attached. Look, we won't go into that too much.
I left out lots of really nasty stuff on that article because Prigozhin said some shitty shit.
Do not want to get caught in those Hunter Biden weeds there.
I haven't seen the cocks, I'm not sure. But yeah,
the involvement
Hunter Biden has a great cock, though.
The involvement of Wagner in the special military operation in Ukraine was said to be the denazification of Ukraine. You know, this was the whole Putin justification for the invasion of Ukraine was to denazify it. This was obviously bullshit.
Obviously,
it's harder to swallow when you realise that one of the founders has a boner for Hitler. Excellent outlet, the Daily Beast, sought comment from Prigozhin about Utkin's love for the Third Reich and reported, Prigozhin, in a furious comment to the Daily Beast, did not deny Utkin's peculiar way of signing Wagner documents or his apparent fondness for Nazism. Instead, he said, in order to defeat Nazism, you must try it on yourself. Dimitry Utkin is trying Nazism on for fuck's sake. That's what he said.
I'm sorry.
It's unbelievable.
That makes no fucking sense at all. The thing that annoys me about, and this has annoyed me since day dot with cookers, it doesn't need to. Their target audience is these Putin simps whose cognitive dissonance prevent them from hearing the bleeding fucking obvious even when it's thrown in front of them. It's these cunts like Boycott who are pushing the denazification line. They would know all of this stuff. Boycott would know this. And while I don't think old Simo's joining fucking Mensa anytime soon, he's not the smartest fucking boy in the playground, the sharpest tool in the shed. He knows better. But he knows his followers don't, and he pushes these lines. And that annoys the fuck out of me, just because I think dishonesty sucks. But the public image of Wagner in Russia is also shaped in the same way that the US military and intelligence are portrayed and perceived by the US public, and that it's action movies. So let's not say that Wagner is this crazy outlier that does all this crazy shit. They do, but there's similarities to things that we hold dear and, let's say, normal. And these are classic hero journey shit narratives. You know the type.
Sliced alone in the lead role is Yevgeny Prigozhin.
To be fair, Rambo was a very anti-authoritarian film, though, so I'll give him that. Yeah.
Look, this comes from the Kremlin and also from Wagner itself. Paratet Films, a subsidiary of Wagner, owned by Prigozhin, that pumps out pro-Wagner flicks is an example of straight-up vertically integrated propaganda. It must be said again, the US military has a lot of involvement in making pro-military films in Hollywood. Certainly a long history of it. The producers of Top Gun didn't rent the jets from Avis. It was a quid pro quo with Air Force, of course. Generally speaking, US filmmakers want to make pro-military propaganda, but for the box office, not necessarily to pump up the purple piss running through the American patriots' hearts.
You know what they're like. You know what they're fucking like. But Wagner is shown in a film named The Tourist. This is like an example. It's apparently like translated to Tourist, which depicts the group heading over to the Central African Republic, where they become these sort of heroes in the fight against these pesky rebels and corrupt politicians, all the bad guys. They don't show the rape and the executions by sledgehammer. You know, they leave that on the cutting room floor, right? You know?
Yeah, one of the lines in Tourist translated says, the Americans fight for democracy, we fight for justice. Wow, that's Schwarzenegger. Right there.
What is that? What does
like
that actually mean, though?
Schwarzenegger lines. You know, what the fuck does it even mean?
Meaningless. And you're right. Look, I think that is great. I think it's really important to not give us a free pass, because it's not like as if military propaganda through the film industry is new. But I mean, I'm sorry. I saw that line, the Americans fight for democracy, but we fight for justice. Fuck you. Shut up. That doesn't make any sense at all. You're just saying words to make us feel emotions and hopefully not question them. So piss off. But the thing that's kind of fucked up there's two layers to this. Apparently, there are pro-Wagner cartoons.
Ooh.
Now, this isn't entirely shocking considering how many pro-US military cartoons there are. I mean, how many times have you seen a cartoon with a fucking general in it? But I genuinely do not remember any cartoons about private military contractors. Like, when was the last Blackwater cartoon you saw? You know?
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure if I'm giving too much rope to these guys. You know?
No, I think that's right. Look, coming back to Wagner's adventurism, they definitely found a lucrative niche in exploiting civil wars. And while the USA are known for doing this and profiting through predatory trade deals in the aftermath of the conflict that they helped create, Wagner does it in a fairly special way. It must be remembered that Wagner Group is mostly made up of poorly paid idiots. War crimes are fairly common in Wagner-led operations, with claims that a lack of oversight mixed with a rank and file full of sociopaths has resulted in civilian massacres with the sole purpose of using terror as a weapon in civil conflicts. One such massacre in Mali saw at least 500 people dead over 4 days. Witnesses reported it was, and I quote, armed white men who spoke an unknown language. So not French.
Not English.
Yeah, well, Mali is French-speaking.
Well, it's French, yeah, but like French and English have the similarities.
Other language. It must be said, it wasn't a matter of Wagner just walking into a village and opening fire, which is an important detail.
Yeah, it wasn't just rocking up to a town.
But it was a military operation that showed absolutely no restraint.
No.
And The Guardian reported that Samira Daoud, Amnesty International's regional director for West and Central Africa, said what happened in Moura, that's in Mali, could constitute crimes under international law. I'd say that's a fairly straightforward conclusion to reach. Daoud said, while the UN notes that around 30 combatants from the armed group Katiba Masina were present in Moura on 27 March 2022, their presence can in no way justify the extrajudicial executions, rapes, it's always rapes, and looting committed by the armed forces against the inhabitants and stallholders trapped by their siege.
Yeah, so I'm just going to give a little bit of a side note here and say that there is a lot of references to rape that I've researched in this, and I've left them out quite intentionally because they're a bit triggering for people. Rape is
a form of terrorism. Rape is a form of cultural terrorism.
I've left them out of this episode because I don't want our listeners to have to sort of experience that. I want to sort of level it off a little bit.
I understand.
But there's a lot of rape in Wagner's thing, and that's where I'm going to try and end it. But that is a very, very large part of their use of fear tactic and horror. So the Mali government, basically a military dictatorship, after a coup in 2021, has employed Wagner to help control an Islamic insurgency. It happens. It's happened everywhere. There's ISIS, there's all these sort of things. But they're a former French colony, as we said, and the French have sort of let go of their colonies a little bit. The imperialism urges kind of worn down a bit.
Well, the French came in to assist. I just want to break away there. But the French military came in to assist, but they were made to feel very, very unwelcome. And, of course, they were thinking, well, why are we here? And so they left. And in that vacuum, while you had this Islamic insurgency group, perhaps most notorious for kidnapping a school full of school girls and taking them away.
Classic sort of Taliban style stuff.
Yeah. Islamic State stuff.
Yeah.
It was the Mali government looking around and saying, hello, Wagner, come and help us.
Yeah, you seem cheap and you seem effective. But that actually fills a real vacuum in my research, and I appreciate you putting that in. That's really good. The interesting thing is that what I found in my research is that the invisible hand behind a lot of this is Sergei Lavrov.
Sergei Lavrov, good old Sergei.
Now, do you know how I know about Sergei Lavrov? The podcast. And do you know who told me about it? The guy on the other side of the mic.
Sergei Lavrov.
You love Sergei.
He is just a bullish human being. I'll give you a couple of very, very quick stories. The first,
I knew there'd be a couple.
the first one was he had a meeting with the Australian foreign minister, who was then Julie Bishop, and Julie Bishop requested a glass of water, frog in the throat sort of thing. I was just wondering if I could have a glass of water. So Lavrov organised to pass her a glass of pure vodka. And she drank deeply from it and almost sort of vomited and basically, coughed and spluttered and all that sort of stuff. And Lavrov thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen.
Funniest thing is ever. Yeah.
Lavrov now
disgusting.
has the look of a man since the invasion of Ukraine. Has the look of the man who used to travel the world and be a very, very powerful figure, but now knows that if he goes into the wrong parts of the world, and he has travelled to Turkey, he has travelled to India, but if he travelled, for example, into an EU country, he would be arrested.
Yeah,
and he
just
would
straight
be
up
dragged before the Hague. If he ended up in the United States and he wouldn't be going there in a hurry, he would be arrested on federal crimes as well.
See how I put Lavrov in there as bait? It's going to come back.
He's just another one of these sort of clod-footed Russians. I mean, but they're not. Don't think for a moment that Lavrov is stupid. He is cunning as a shit-ass rat. Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
But now the walls are closing in on him. Lavrov, by the way, has wealth, personal wealth, valued in the billions.
Yeah.
And this is from a Russian foreign minister.
Yeah. It's not exactly
That's how the Kremlin operate.
And it's terrifying. But okay, so look, I'll just draw a line through this, which is if you want to sum up the Wagner Group as a result, this is what we said. It's kind of like a mix between sort of the CIA and Blackwater in that sort of American sort of sense, but it's sort of managed and staffed by mostly poorly paid dead shits and sort of complete psychopaths. But as we just said before, cunning as shithouse rats. I mean, you can't underestimate these people.
And also bring, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Joe, but also bring this sort of Russian cultural element to this. And that is the Russians, Russian people have endured enormous crises, not just in the last 100 years, but in previous centuries. There is really no value attached to human life. Yeah. And anything with just a sea of bodies is just, unfortunately for many Russian people, is a shrug of the shoulders.
Trapped in a book. Yeah. Yeah, it's fucking crazy. So, look, going back to these guys, they are staffed by dead shit, and one of the great things about dead shits is they're easy to trick. So, it turns out from a lot of reporting I've read that a lot of the Wagner mercenaries, they're not even paid. They just don't pay them. They say, look, get on this train and just never pay them.
Steal, you want something, steal it.
Yeah, basically, that's exactly what happens. I mean, I'm not sure if that's said or implied, but that's exactly what happens. But they're also often promised these sort of vast fortunes in the form of a cut of the take of the resources, but it never comes. It just goes straight to Prigozhin and then goes to the Kremlin, it goes to Wagner, it goes to the military, it goes to whatever. But the thing is, what are you going to do, comrade? Are you going to fucking call the cops? I mean, get on your fucking bike, Ivan. Fucking piss off to the Congo and, steal some gold. Go shoot someone.
I have a complaint. President Putin.
Yeah. I think this window is too high and I think it's too intact. I mean, come the fuck on. So look, the comparison of Blackwater and the CIA here, it's so intentional because I want to make sure it's important not to pretend that these private military contractors, PMCs, are some crazy new thing that Russia's come up with to get around these pesky things like the Geneva Convention. I'm not ignorant to the fact that this has happened before and it'll happen again, and it's not just the Russians doing it, but the Wagner Group does it in a way that really pushes the boundary of what is acceptable in a theatre of war. I mean, I think the rules of war are kind of absurd because the whole thing is there to kill people, but massacres, man. Landmines. I mean, fucking landmines. Landmines were used by Wagner in Libya as recently as 2020. Landmines are almost universally known as being naughty and not to be used. Wagner just doesn't fucking care about these human rights conventions. Can
I just interrupt you again? And that this is part of the reason why the Ukrainian counteroffensive is really slowed down, because much of the Donbass and around the Dnipro River are just so heavily mined that
they're using landmines now.
Yeah,
I didn't find that.
And that is, I mean, it's contentious, and I won't say, but it's contentious. But that's one of the reasons why the Ukrainians sought cluster weapons, because it's a very easy and quick way of clearing landmines. Yeah.
Fuck, because I was going to say, the cluster weapon thing really does take away a lot of the moral high ground. But shit,
well, the Russians used them. The Russians used them on basically on civilian populations and the Ukrainian military.
That's fucking disgusting.
And don't think for a moment that I'm naive enough to believe the Ukrainians won't use them on Russian
Well,
and in fact, on Russian troops. They have agreed to certain limitations about using cluster weapons.
Well, if the Russians are in Ukraine, they're probably there for a reason, right? They're not invading the other country. Anyway, so look, I'm just going to give it a sidebar on this, which is that Motorola chips were used in landmines found in Cambodia. I think actually Bob Ellis told me this a long time ago, but it was also a really hot topic in these sort of left-wing conspiracy circles back in sort of my day when I was a bit of a cooker, when jet fuel didn't melt steel beams and all that sort of shit. But the amazing thing that I found out today as I was researching this, because this triggered off a bit of a memory thing, is that it turns out that Motorola selling these 10-cent chips that unintentionally turned out to be used in landmines were horrified by the discovery and just threw endless amounts of money into anti-landmine organizations.
Yeah, bit of corporate conscience. I like that.
I used to rail on about Motorola being a landmine company.
I was watching some footage. I was just watching some footage of the Ukrainian counteroffensive and this long process of landmine clearing. And there was a soldier walking through a trench who stepped on a anti-personnel mine.
Fuck.
So that's opposed
Don't look at that.
Landmines that are bigger and nastier than blow up vehicles. So he stepped on it and he just kept going, and the thing blew up, and it sort of just blew him away, but it didn't. He wasn't injured.
That's insane.
It was quite crazy.
And one thing that's interesting about it, because of the international conventions, a lot of these landmines are from the early 90s. When that was somewhat okay. So you'll find a lot of these things will have like old fuses and are like sort of somewhat past their expiry date. But even then, I mean, dude, come on, they're fucking landmines.
Claymores, they're still playing with claymores.
They do not discriminate.
Yeah. Look, Wagner's presence in Libya has two objectives. They're very active in Africa, but Libya is a hotbed of extremism and warlordism and all sorts of chaos. Well,
the Americans destabilized the fuck out of it with getting rid of Gaddafi, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
yes.
and getting rid of Gaddafi was a good thing, like getting rid of Saddam Hussein was a good thing, but then you have a vacuum. And
vacuums are bad.
And vacuums never end,
bad.
Well. So when we look at Wagner's presence in Libya, it has two objectives. Money is one, but the other is to control oil output. One of the things that kept Gaddafi in power for decades was oil wealth.
Oil, yeah.
NATO countries looking to reduce reliance on Russian resources find resistance in opening up the tap in Libya because Wagner is behind the controls on many strategic reserves deep in conflicted territories. Due to a vested interest in keeping conflicts active, Wagner actively destabilises the country, it must be said, just as the US has done in a million instances.
Venezuela, yeah.
This isn't new. PMCs and mercenaries have been a thing since the ancient Egyptians, but Wagner's mix of recklessness, stupidity, and sociopathy really take it to a different place.
Yeah, and that's like I was saying, not referring to a lot of war crimes that are just really quite triggering and awful, but that's what happens, Yeah. So look, it's really hard to say exactly how much Wagner makes from these sort of extracurricular activities they get up to, but according to a podcast I was listening to, a shipment of cookies, of all things, or something similar, I think it may have been one of those vague anecdotes, but let's just go on the anecdotal level here, was inspected coming out of Sudan because they don't fucking export cookies on planes.
They're not known for their cookies.
They're not cookie merchants. So it set off a bit of a red flag, and the inspectors boarded the plane. And let's face it, the reason why they were exporting cookies, because they're idiots. These Russians are not smart. So the inspectors boarded the plane and they found boxes of cookies, of course, yeah, as you do. And underneath them, barely concealed, were bars of gold. And they were being smuggled out of the country, exempt from local taxes, royalties, and all sorts of conditions that apply to gold exports. They're quite onerous and they're quite expensive. The undocumented nature of this sort of take of the natural resources of an area just adds that extra layer of mystery into this Wagner story that no one really knows how much money they've extorted from these areas and how.
Billions.
Oh, it's absolutely the fucking billions. But another vague but significant number, which might give you a bit of an idea of how ridiculous it is in the billions, 25%, which is the amount that Wagner would get for any oil and gas fields that Wagner would either claim or protect from ISIS sources in Syria. I mean, that's so much money. And the company that takes a cut, Evropolis Limited, is owned by Prigozhin. I mean, this is according to US Treasury documents I dug up today on the train. But how much of that goes to Wagner, how much of that goes to Kremlin, and how much of that goes to Prigozhin's back pocket? It didn't say. I don't know.
Well, we'll get to where Prigozhin is shortly, but his house, it's a substantial house with a helipad, tennis court, swimming
He's
pool,
got cash.
etc. He's got a bit of dough.
He doesn't need a tenner.
Well,
He'll be fine.
he did have. I think we should almost be talking about him in the past tense. But yes, extremely wealthy.
Very
and of course,
plausible.
The raid on his house was filmed and has been run through Russian media over and over again to say, this man's a thief. Oh, my God. We didn't know.
Oh, my God.
But now we realise this man was a thief. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the feather in Prigozhin's cap is the internet research agency known as a troll farm. It's most famous for bombarding social media with pro-Trump messaging to help Hillary Clinton clinch a stunning defeat from the jaws of victory and install an actual idiot as the President of the United States of America in 2016. In fact, there are warrants out for DOJ, warrants out for Prigozhin's arrest in regard to election tampering. He and 11 other Russians linked to the Internet Research Agency were issued those warrants for arrest after the Mueller report was released. But the Internet Research Agency isn't just all about 4chan and Twitter and red-pilling idiot Westerners, although that does happen. The online disinformation machine is also active in African nations, including Mozambique, Madagascar, Mali, and Zimbabwe.
Yeah, look, I must say the IRA has done, not the IRA, but the Internet Research Agency, has done an incredible job of planting doubt in the minds of Westerners when it comes to the invasion of Ukraine.
Very good at propaganda.
And like they're using the traditionally gullible conspiracy theory space, and that is so clever. But I mean, like, it's obvious, but it's also not. And this is clearly due to their mistrust of reputable sources, so they can dismiss anything from the BBC that's telling the truth, and their addiction to counter narratives. So you just counter narrative anything from the mainstream media, and they'll just lap it up like dogs because they see it as a rebellion, and it's quite bizarrely enabling for them. This is the thing, though. It has worked outside of this because you've got these sort of traditionally anti-NATO types like Jeremy Corbyn. They're not these conspiracy theorists. The guy was like fucking, almost he was the leader of the Labour Party. He was almost the prime minister. Well, not almost, actually.
Yes, he was, yeah.
Well, I mean, he got pretty thrashed. But either way, you've got these tanky types who are totally Putin-pilled, and you start to wonder, I mean, fuck, how effective is this shit?
They'll tell you they dislike Putin, but they dislike NATO more. And that's the thing. Look, as a side note and a bit of a hat tip, the Russians have done an incredible job on planting disinformation and motivating people to spread it themselves with a dogmatic sense of urgency to tell everyone everywhere how Ukrainians are actually the bad guys.
Terrible.
They were invaded. The Ukrainians were invaded.
Yeah,
we saw it with our own eyes. Their cities were bombed. There were missiles dispatched to kill civilians.
Never happened.
But they're the bad guys, apparently. It's just amazing work to be able to spin that around. The LA Times reported on a finding by Meta, Facebook's parent company, that Chinese disinformation campaigns simply attempting to polarize American voters often made clumsy English language mistakes and posting during Chinese working hours. The Russians, as dopey as the boots on the ground are, have done an incredible job in comparison. So well done, guys. You've made everyone go fucking mental.
They've done a really good job. So, look, that there is like Wagner and Prigozhin in a nutshell, But let's crack on with the juicy stuff because this is the recent stuff, the mutiny. The shit that happened recently on the doorstep. The absolute fucking balls on a man who thought it was prudent to fuck with Putin.
Yeah,
Not
probably
smart.
hasn't ended all that well for him.
I
Look,
don't
more than
think it has.
2 weeks after Wagner Group's failed march on Moscow that saw its leader, Yevgeny, it's actually spelled Yevgeny. I don't know whether that creates an Evgeny.
I saw another
Prigozhin.
spelling today as well, which I was surprised by. I can't remember what it was.
spellings. It probably goes with the man. He was supposed to be placed in exile in Belarus. We might remember this. And then I had a recurring image of him strolling around his new apartment, possibly in Minsk, in one of those tiresome renovation shows on TV. Wow, floor-to-ceiling windows. And look, a range of herbal teas. This place is great.
What could possibly go wrong?
Putin has said he can forgive almost anything besides treachery. He was asked this in an interview. What can you do? Can you forgive? He says, yes, I can forgive. I can forgive almost anything besides treachery. But he let Prigozhin walk. That's what we thought. That's what we were led to believe.
It was led to believe, yeah.
Despite knowing that Wagner fighters began a march to Moscow and shot down 6 Russian aircraft, 5 helicopters, and an Illusion 222M Kut aerial command post until they pulled up. There's 13 Russian crew died in the attacks.
Yeah, it wasn't bloodless. That's for damn sure. So, look, when it comes down to it, people will say that Putin's Bond villain is probably safer now. But, I mean, it's getting less and less likely that's real. I mean, there's no official line yet. He was meant to have gone off to, a farm up north, up in Belarus or Minsk.
It's a long way away that you just can't quite get to. But he's gone to the farm north and he's living in a big paddock.
It does feel like that joke is actually kind of real. I think maybe he's gone to a farm up north.
Yeah, we've got some updates on all of that. But look, regardless, no one will be selling life insurance to Prigozhin. And he's arguably the worst man in the world.
Possibly, well, he did sue that journalist, which is pretty bad.
Possibly Putin would be, but I'm going to go for Prigozhin coming in a close second, if indeed he is alive, because we know now.
What about Joseph Kony? I mean,
that Prigozhin.
Think about that.
We know.
I'll send
now,
you a video.
We know now that Prigozhin did not go into exile in Belarus, whose President Alexander Lukashenko told a porky. Who'd have thought?
Who would
have thought Lukashenko would lie? I mean, it's often said, when Putin's lying because his lips are moving. With Lukashenko, it's just a little twiddle of that moustache of his. Mm-hmm. And Prigozhin, it seems, remained in Russia. Ooh. Russian media reported a meeting between Putin and the Wagner boss 5 days after Putin had called him treasonous. Treasonous. And you will pay. You will be punished. That's what he said publicly on Russian television. And then they had a meeting 5 days later.
Where
they all had a bit of a chat. It all went rather well, according to RT. Everything was forgiven.
Oh, good.
Patently, that's bullshit. Prigozhin is either dead or in jail.
Fair.
Not for him, the defenestration or hanging from a tree in Red Square, because there remain thousands of soldiers loyal to him. He's been either quietly disposed of or sitting in a very, very deep hole in the ground with bars on the top.
And for those who don't have a convenient friend like Tom Ellis who tell them what defenestration means, because he did when I was like 12, it was his little internet nickname, that is being thrown through a window.
Thrown through a window. And who can forget the defenestration of Prague?
But let's face it, he's living on borrowed time. I mean, all jokes aside, well, yeah, exactly. It's just the ball's on you fucking with Putin. So Wagner's soldiers on the Ukrainian border, they've basically been absorbed by this sort of great Russian military by an enforced contract signing thing. It's you have to sign up to be in us now. But since the Wagner group has been sort of absorbed into the Russian military, NBC News has reported this sort of purge of Wagner groups from the Central African Republic. Now, I personally thought that this meant they were thrown into some wood chipper somewhere. Because, purge, what does a purge mean? You fucking kill them all, right? But apparently...
Generally, it's a killing.
It just fucking sounds like it to me. And let's face it, these people aren't beyond that. But apparently it appears about 600 troops have been spotted flying out of the capital of the Central African Republic in Bangui. I don't know how to pronounce that, to be honest.
After having stripped the place
blind.
Well,
yes, of course.
It's where they've probably done the work the most.
Well, they're actually doing
Central African Republic.
They're taking timber from that area. That's the resource they're stealing. So since the mutiny in Moscow, it is said that Wagner troops are refusing to work under the Russian military defense, Russian Ministry of Defense, who Prigozhin has sort of taken shots at in public, and not literally taken shots at, but claims of corruption, incompetence, and some of which was the sort of basis of the march on Moscow in the first place. This may well be sort of deeply entrenched in the Wagner ranks because these Wagner soldiers have been listening to this stuff from Prigozhin saying that the ministry's corrupt, don't trust them. Well, they're your new boss, right? Are you going to resign? What are you going to do? So also, you might not be getting the same pay. Maybe some of these guys were getting a cut of the cut, right? Who knows? So other reports claim that nothing has changed and nothing will change, except maybe the name of the Wagner group. So they're just going to keep the status quo going, but they'll call it something else PMC. Yeah. And look, I know you're a big fan of rebranding. I listened to True Jacks recently. You're a big fan of rebranding.
Well, the coffee crisp has become now the Chiquito.
Oh, good.
I think, or something like that.
Yes.
Something like that, and it's been wonderful for sales. So that's what's happened.
We've all benefited from it.
Prigozhin's place has been raided. He's been made to look ridiculous. This is why we know he's been incarcerated. That he was, photographed wearing really bad wigs and a facial merkin. Just that's the idea. The idea is to humiliate him. Also, then to just go, look at all the gold he's got here. He's been stealing. So basically, Wagner Group, according to Putin, and this has just been reported today as we record. What is it? The 14th of July. He has said that Wagner no longer exists.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean it's stopped. It just means it's going to be called something else.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. It's textbook stuff. So look, at the end of the day, Sergei Lavrov wants the rivers of gold to keep flowing in these cookie boxes from African nations with gold underneath, whatever you want to fucking call it. These Russian mercenaries, they're likely to stick around in Africa because they're causing shit. They're charging money to basically fix problems they've caused. This is it's a good business model. Why would you stop this?
Yeah, and if anything, Russia is cash poor.
Look, it's bringing money in.
As a result of sanctions.
They're bringing planes of gold in.
They're just not going to be able to buy things with them.
Well, true.
That's the difficulty with sanctions, but that just means that Putin will have more and more. And there are a couple of things to talk about here. Firstly, we have this sort of tedious conversations about who the wealthiest man in the world is, whether it's Elon Musk, it's not now, whether it's Amazon dude or whether it's someone else, Gates or, but it's not.
Larry Ellison's
not by
in there,
shot. Vladimir Putin is the world's wealthiest man. There's simply
we just don't know about
it. And he would very likely be somewhere near a trillionaire.
Fuck that.
That's the first one that we've ever seen. Now, there's another thing that we really want to look at here, and we just have to remind ourselves that Wagner is not a group of mercenaries. It is, but it isn't. It is really just an international criminal cartel. Yeah, that is beyond the reach, really, of law enforcement anywhere.
Yep, and they go to places with no laws. I mean, they're the libertarian champions at the end of the day.
Yeah, and they're ripping off some of the poorest economies.
It's a market at work, you know.
Look, it's springtime for glaziers in Moscow. We've known that for a little while. And possibly also Minsk, as Putin lines a few suspects up against the wall and has them answer some difficult questions in trying conditions about what they knew and when. Putin will want to know who, if any, in the Kremlin, or more broadly in the Silovik, that is what the Russians call their military and law enforcement networks. It's called the Silovik. And who among them supported Prigozhin, or knew of what Prigozhin called the Freedom March. And you can see why cookers love it.
Yeah, because they just put freedom on things, and it makes sense. So look, when it comes down to it, Prigozhin's home in St. Petersburg was raided. And this is such an important thing because there was all manner of weather found. You see these things where Prigozhin was photographed wearing bad wigs. As we said before, these sort of facial merkins that make him look like a fucking moron.
This is just a way of denouncing
discredits
him. This is the Russian way of denouncing him.
So you go in there, you see the cash bundles, you see the gold, and you see this guy as being a criminal, because this is what happens with criminals. You take photos of their stash and you look shitty. Yeah. Putin, being one of the richest men alive with crypts of this stuff, is being heralded as a leader of a country, whereas Prigozhin's a common criminal because of the narrative they put across.
He's a thief,
and a weird guy who will wear a fucking pube wig to get past a boundary.
To escape.
Yeah, exactly. To escape. Is a fugitive already by this narrative. It's really important to show this dopey propagandizing.
Russia is really just a very, very difficult country to understand. I've read a lot of Russian history. It is a very different place. Also, it has been widely reported that a Russian general with strong links to Prigozhin and Wagner, Sergei Surovikin, a deputy commander on the Ukrainian front, has disappeared. Official reports say Surovikin is resting.
Oh, yeah.
having a bit of a lie down.
Very tired.
Resting possibly in peace.
He's been very busy.
Putin's not even bothering to make his purges look like accidents anymore. People aren't falling out of windows anymore. They're just having a bit of a rest, having a bit of a lie down.
No, having a nap. It's a weekend at Bernie's, but weekend at Bernie's. That was German. What the fuck am I doing?
Whether it's Prigozhin or Surovikin, the words of Pete Clemenza in The Godfather come to mind. You remember when he was making up a sauce,
Yeah.
and James Caan, Sonny asked him about the driver, and he says, "Oh, we won't be seeing him around no more." So that's where we are with Prigozhin and Surovikin, in the words of Fat Pete Clemenza.
No one is quite sure how much Putin has been weakened by this. And we'll take a look at that shortly. But the answer lies in the Russian military and how it copes with the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which they didn't even expect to exist, really. It was meant to be for days.
Well, the war was supposed to be over in a week.
Yeah. Rings of the past with Iraq and whatnot, let's face it.
And it raised all sorts of problems because it raised all sorts of questions. The Ukrainian can be a good defensive force, but can it be a good counterattacking force?
And maybe Russia suck as an offensive force.
And what's going to happen with the morale of the military? Look, Putin has been weakened. There is no metric for dictators other than in power or out of it. But we will soon see signs, trip and fall accidents, people having a long lie down, generals having a bit of a lie down, or a flight to safe haven. And we'll talk about one shortly. What is known as Putin's grip on power is loosened, and cookers simply don't know whether to shit or go blind.
Oh, there's confusion in the ranks.
Whoa.
I mean, look, there's so much more. And we may do a premium on this because the takes are fucking extensive, but they are lengthy and kind of annoying. But this is a short and sweet one because our good friend Guru is, if anything, beautifully short and sweet. He has ADHD if he has anything. And he said this week that Joe Biden had been arrested.
What?
Good. Well,
Yeah.
no,
You think that'd make the news?
Well, no, he couldn't confirm it, but it was apparently the word around the traps because, he's heard things from his connections, like Babbitt has connections.
Like Babs, yeah. His contacts. Yeah.
That's actually a reference to our previous episode. Anyway, we did a double header today, but the 46 POTUS is apparently under arrest, but no one's noticed.
Yeah.
So they got a body double.
Odd.
They've told the body double a bunch of stuff about Amtrak, and now no one's noticed.
You're walking the wrong way. You've got to be more stilted, like you've just had a stroke.
Exactly, yeah. No, but you've got to say things like, I like catching the train, and more beans, thanks, Mum. Like, what the fuck? Shut the fuck up, idiot.
Shut up, Guru. Shut up, you idiot.
Idiot. But meanwhile, the hard left and the hard right, they were left stunned, almost in fucking theatre because the horseshoe theory is real, rendered silent and morose until they could make sense of it by clutching onto their little conspiracy theory comfort blankets. This one's weighted. Sorry, but look, tankies are going to tank, and fucking these people are just so fucking predictable. And look, they also really like buying mystery cures for everything, including their emotional insecurity. So the first 12 hours of this situation were honestly spectacular. And
yeah, they were.
We watched them with that sort of bated breath as this Wagner group just stampede.
This army, yeah.
Probably maybe is it 15,000 soldiers?
Well, they said 25. It's probably not as many, 25,000.
So what, cook 'em out?
Probably not as many, yeah. Probably halve it, yeah.
Okay. All right, well, look, I'll go with 15 if you want to. But, I heard...
Somewhere around there.
I heard a lot of numbers. But either way, no one was able to stop them because whether you say 15 or 25, there was no counter number. There was no Vic Pol number.
They're shooting planes out of the air, shooting choppers out of the air, and on their way to Moscow, and no one was going to stop them.
They're apparently what was happening is they were making these defensive positions on bridges and highways into the capital.
Tanks were rolling in the streets of Moscow,
and they're putting spikes on the road and shit. Yeah. Trying to stop this thing with random defensive measures. It's pretty fucking dire.
Yeah, if you pull the old spikes across the road thing, you're going to get a few flat tires, but then there's some heavily armed goons who are just going to get out and go walking anyway.
Yeah, there was a lot to be concerned about. So look, okay. So we've spoken at length about the link between cookers and their love for Putin, and it's so inexplicable. It's a strange thing, but it is worth mapping because when you look at it, Putin is overtly, at least, religious, and we don't think about this enough. Onegs, God, hoodie, God, guru, God.
Yep.
All of our
Yep,
homegrown
yep.
cookers are all about goddamn God. This guy does the same thing. Well, on face value.
Maybe he's one of us.
Well, he belongs on the Russian Orthodox Church thing. I mean, like, look, this might be the same thing as Obama, who I swear to God is a fucking atheist, but swears to God that he's not. But it gives him such a big tick from the Bible bashers because what he does is he gives this beautiful endorphin kick to fuckwits who hate LGBTQI folk, because he hates them too. And he's ticking all these sort of boxes on this like cookers hard men list. They love alpha males. They get boners for this power complex. And here's this guy who just ticks all those fucking boxes. I mean, it's a fucking no-brainer, right? But of course, for all their babble about freedom, let's not forget that hard men are the antithesis of freedom. And they actually love fucking tyrants. They love and who's a bigger tyrant than Putin?
Look, he also, if we're looking for that connection with the fringe right, he also hates LGBTQI folk. So if you really wanted a definition, you know, aside from how cookers interpret and perceive him, what we're looking at with Putin, and this is sometime the op-ed discussion, is he a communist? Is he sort of a figurehead?
Oh, is he this, that, the other thing? Blah, blah.
Is he sort of a czarist Russian? He's neither of those things. He's a kleptocrat. He's a fucking thief.
He's a thief.
On a scale that's almost unimaginable.
And that's why his military sucks, because he siphoned all the money for himself.
Yeah.
100%. Pathetic.
Yeah, look, but the cookers just couldn't stand it because their hero was staring down the pointy end of a fully blown coup.
That's it.
And hard left, they were completely befuddled too. They pretend to despise Putin. Well, they genuflect to him. Leftists like Jeremy Corbyn had been demanding NATO stop supplying the Ukrainians with munitions. But in that 12-hour moment, while Wagner got to within striking distance of Moscow, around about 400 kilometres,
that's close enough.
It was panic stations all around. Beds were shit in. Pants were very, very wet. And in our own backyard, who can forget it? Simeon, the Aussie Cossack Boykov, I was watching him while all of this was unfolding. He's holed up in the Russian consulate in Double Bay in Sydney's East, of course, as we know, evading a jail sentence after having been convicted of assault occasioning bodily harm of a 72-year-old man.
72?
Yes, 72, a septuagenarian.
72.
In December last year. Simeon assumed the role of Corporal Jones from Dad's Army. I don't know if you guys remember this. Maybe an old cultural reference.
Maybe you're 72.
I'm getting there. So I'm an old man, so it kind of works. Don't panic, no, everyone, don't panic. And that's what Simeon was doing.
Well, what he said was, to clear some questions, no coup was announced. No, there was no coup going on right now. Okay, cool. How do you fucking know? You're just an asshole in Double Bay.
But if there was a coup, you're going to expand this. If there was a coup, Putin gets knocked off, defenestrated, out of the Kremlin, and then there's a new regime in charge who eventually,
this asshole.
Not immediately, but
after months.
eventually go, what's this fat bastard doing at the consulate?
Why is our food bill at the consulate really expensive?
Yeah. A lot of borscht.
That's actually really low calorie, to be honest. Borscht is very low calorie.
Beets and what have you.
Beets and cabbage,
I'm not drinking purple soup.
That's actually a very good diet.
I don't care what you say about it. I'm just not drinking it.
Your
Cold
shit will make
soup?
you think you're bowel cancer. It's actually pretty good, but that's just that. So look, I'm going to give you a great quote from that fucking opportunistic asshole, because basically what he did was he had 5 bob each way. He was like, okay, cool. So either Putin wins this or Wagner wins this. But I tell you what, there's one thing I do have: boxes of Wagner Group merch in my garage. So he said this on his Telegram account, quote, meanwhile, Wagner Group t-shirts and merchandise are selling hot right now. Yes, we ship worldwide. Like, you're going to get your Wagner Group t-shirt from fucking Australia of all places. Do you understand where we are and how this works? Look, it just sounds like Mrs. Boykov's is sitting on boxes of t-shirts in a garage. A garage he probably doesn't pay paid rent on in about 3 years and is constantly being subpoenaed for. And they're about to fall in value by quite
a
some
lot.
margin.
Quite a lot.
Because apparently the Wagner Group's out of sorts with the whole C group.
Vladimir Putin has said that it doesn't exist.
Well, that's going to be a
that
problem.
means, in Russian terms at least, it doesn't exist.
Wow.
And anyone wants to argue, there's a fucking window over there.
As they say, problematic.
It gets worse, of course, because Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene got on the toots and hinted that the Wagner insurrection, it wasn't a coup, it was an insurrection, and that insurrection was in fact due to some CIA, American, deep state US black ops.
Cool.
Well,
So
she thought it might be.
I'll give you the quote here because this is genius. After our government has been funding a proxy war with Russia and Ukraine for over a year, I sure hope our government isn't behind a coup attempt currently happening in Russia. And that was an actual tweet that she said.
That was a tweet. That was a
an
tweet.
actual
While
tweet.
all this was unfolding, it was just so beautiful. Not a skerrick of evidence,
No.
but hey, let's just get it out there.
Oh, it's
maybe the deep state did this.
Of course.
Yeah.
She's been trained.
I took the opportunity at the time to look at Daily Caller, a views paper rather than a news website. It's a views paper, folks.
Oh.
And that whole concept came out in the UK from the Sunday Observer, who came out proudly and said, "We're not a newspaper, we're a views paper."
I
and
love
it was
that.
just loaded
That's
up
fantastic.
with op-ed.
Bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. And Daily Caller is also a views paper website, and is owned, of course, and funded famously by Tucker Carlson.
Well, there is a little bit of funding. I did recently listen to some Daily Caller Conspiracy was saying that some of the funding from Daily Caller might have come from the Koch brothers and their legacy.
Oh, there'd be a rich pool of bastards involved.
Just worth putting in there.
Putting the money together there.
I was listening to some Dare on the worksite this week, and I'm like, hold on, Daily Caller? I think there's a Koch brother in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, one of them's dead and recanted on on the
apparently
deathbed.
so on the deathbed. Yeah, that's actually we should cover that sometime.
We should.
That's a really interesting thing.
Because they've been very, very active through the Heritage Foundation and what have you.
They very much have.
But Tucker Carlson is reputed to be involved in Daily Caller, the founder of Daily Caller. And, of course, he is a noted Russophile and Putin appeaser. And on Tucker's views paper online, there was a brief mention of it on Saturday night, Australian Eastern Time, but the following day it was gone.
Oh.
I went looking for it, and we found it buried in world news rather than the front page news, that
On
you
the Daily
would
Caller
expect it to be.
So instead of leading with the fact that Putin's entire situation is under fire, he buried that on the back page and led with a story about how News Corp were being mean to him. That's so upsetting. Oh,
no. You signed a non-complete course, fucko. Did it with your own.
What did you expect? Oh, I'm going to go and start my own thing on Twitter.
I'm going to go and do something. My News Corp made me.
No, Tucker, no. Look, I'm not exactly going to cheerlead for the fucking legal team of News Corp here, but I'm going to say that between Tucker Carlson and some random law firm representing News Corp,
who play for keeps, by the way.
I'm kind of going for the other side. Fuck you, propagandist. You can eat shit. I'm going for the interns who are
you signed a non-complete course. Tucker, you scumbag.
And look,
you
honestly,
learn to live with it. You got enough money.
That's why you got paid tens of billions of dollars while you got paid.
Exactly right.
Thank you very much. It's the market capitalism that you fucking talk about night on night, that you defend to your death. Now you're being pissy about it? No. Sorry, not going to take
mate.
it.
No, mate. Not
going to
today,
take
mate.
it. No.
Look, and we're missing something, of course, Joel. Can you imagine the sheer panic from friend of the podcast, Pete Evans?
Oh, fuck.
Here was his Lord, Saviour and crazy cult leader staring down the barrel of a complete evisceration.
I love it. And look, when it comes down to Pete Evans, he always posts Tucker. And when Tucker got off Fox News, there was a massive vacuum. His posts went straight down.
Yeah.
Straight down. But let's take a bit
on the
of a
radio
pivot.
lately, but we'll talk about that later.
We'll talk about that later. I need to make sure that I get all the notes on that because it's a real pain in the ass. I'm not even looking at him. I'm having a bit of a brain holiday from Pete.
Yeah.
But let's pivot to Malaysia because by Sunday morning, Twitter boss Elon Musk thought the world had experienced a crafty Russian psyop.
Oh, that's the only way to explain it.
Well, Malaysian blogger Ian Miles Chong, which I'm sure a lot of you know, and if you don't, probably maybe just skip.
Your life is a lot better for not knowing.
Skip 90
Miles
seconds. Just don't participate. As he always does with Elon, he was agreeing like a moron and suggesting
I think Elon's right.
he actually knew all of this, everything.
That was a funny thing.
All along.
He actually said, "Oh no, I already knew this was a Russian psyop. Oh God, you guys, only I could understand it." Yeah,
there's no way this could ever play out any other way. And of course, this asshole then tweeted a photograph of some happy Russians in the Moscow metro, which is tattooed on the Wagner founder's dick, admiring their sort of beaming smiles, their happy demeanor, and just saying that people. Also, just by the way, there's no pride flags, no gay shit.
I can guarantee our listeners, if they haven't heard of Ian Miles Chong,
he's the fucking worst.
Don't Google him. Don't go it. I guarantee you your life will be better for knowing who Ian Miles
through
Chong
this
is.
bit. But for those who aren't skipping, this thing really pisses me off because he had this whole thing about women not being hot enough in video games. The guy looks like a fucking fish. He's
a very unattractive
weird big eyes. He looks like, and they say don't throw stones in glass houses. Don't throw stones when you live in a fish tank. You fish-looking fuck.
I don't want to shame people on their physical
honestly,
appearance, but he is a very unattractive man.
He's a bad-looking guy, and I see the merit in everyone. And to be honest, I reckon someone does, because he doesn't have incel vibes. He has I've gone good enough to actually get laid vibes, and that makes me sad as well, because anyone being within a meter of him, I tell you what, I feel bad for you.
Well, the adult entertainment industry does provide.
Oh God, I hope he's paying for it
for these sorts of situations.
And I hope he's paying well. But look, it was less than 10 years ago that many of those who sat in these sort of outer edges of the right wing were sort of shrieking about the Islamification of Europe. They weren't saying it was based. They weren't saying how awesome it was to subjugate women, and they were saying how terrible it was by this brown army of awful ideologues. No, they were saying there was a death of Western civilization, how progressive values were important, and why weren't this being taught in schools and being enforced, almost codified? And it is codified. We codify these ideals. But when European values such as these, such as respect for women and general just
democracy,
progressive decency, democracy, these are being threatened by Putin in a way that are imperial and real, they went to water. They just they melt.
They literally shit themselves.
Jellyfish. They're demanding that the invaded Ukraine, the civilians who are massacred in airstrikes, made homeless, made fucking absolutely destitute, they should just sue for peace. They should just settle. They should cop it sweet and offer a fucking a tuppence to get past this. Fuck off.
Yeah. And over on the left, Corbyn's sidekick used to be one of his senior advisors, Andrew Murray, a very intriguing character. And he's a leader of Britain's Stalin cheer squad, wouldn't you know? He actually did create, Andrew Murray, the Stalin Society because he believed that Stalin had copped a bad rap in history, and wanted to promote the great man's many achievements, including things like housing. He said, well, look, he did murder over 1 million people, and he starved nearly 25 million Ukrainians.
But things they can't
housing
be all
policy, second to none.
Look, I can definitely sympathise with that my Sydney University days, but at the same time, I mean, I'm no tanky.
So Murray was roused from his. We haven't heard from Corbyn at all. Corbyn hasn't said a word. But Andrew Murray was roused to post just after after the attempted insurrection and reaffirmed that a ceasefire was now even more important than it was before Wagner started shooting down Russian aircraft.
Good.
And then signed off calling for donations. Donations for what? Ukrainian refugees displaced and traumatized by war?
No.
Maybe Jeremy needs a new office chair.
Yeah, I mean, like really vague middle class nonsense.
I got to tell you, the hard left have always been appeasers. And I just want to read something here now, Joel. Let me just take this. In whose interest is this war being fought? This is from an article. In whose interest is this war being fought? For what ends is this war being fought? Is the continuance of this war in the interests of the working people? Now, that might sound like some of the stop the war rhetoric from Corbyn and Murray and co., but it comes from the pen of Rajani Palm Dutt, editor of the Workers' Weekly and General Secretary of the Communist Party of Great Britain, a Stalin apologist to the day he died in 1974. Housing policy? Mwah. Dutt wrote those words, in whose interest is this war being fought, for what ends is this war being fought, is the continuance of this war in the interest of the working people. He wrote those words 2 months after the Nazi invasion of Poland and after Chamberlain had declared war on Germany. Chamberlain was an appeaser, but at least Chamberlain knew when enough was enough. The hard left hasn't budged an inch since 1939. And like the hard right, they hate NATO and the US. Yep. They despise European values and deep down hanker for a hard man to rule us all. You have been listening to the Conditional Release program with your host, Jack the Insider and Joel Hill. Jack can be found on Twitter. I'll let you do that,
Jack the
Joel.
Insider. Well, I mean, look, let's face it. You can say that you can find Jack on Twitter on @Jack the Insider, but you can't really find me on Crunchy Moses with a K because I'm actually search banned on Twitter. Maybe that's changed since I stopped logging in, but I don't really use it anymore. Look, if you want to follow me on Twitter, please do. That's fine. Crunchy Moses with the K. It's a thing, but I hate it so much there. But we do have a Patreon.
Yeah, we do have a Patreon to help keep this sustainable. It's bloody time consuming and we still have to pay the rent, help keep the lights on. And please, listeners, don't forget our Vanuatu building appeal.
That's the one. And look, as we didn't say we we're going to put the hat away, but for as little as $5 a month, you get access to all sorts of bonus stuff. Put a lot of work into it. There's a whole back catalogue. It's pretty funny. I mean, there's a whole thing, like the People's Treaty was really funny. There's things that are worth doing. We've been doing this for a couple of years. Treat yourself.
Yeah, and finally, all feedback, tips and death threats should be sent to the Conditional Release program @gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, even just to tell us that Yevgeny Prigozhin answered your ad on Flat Finders and has moved into your second bedroom.
He's just got the greatest stories. He's so wacky.
I do love his wigs.
He's so well travelled.
I do love his wigs. We're sharing wigs.
Oh, yeah, of course. Merkins, as one would say.
Merkins, yeah, you gotta love a good Merkin. Yeah, thanks, so listeners. There you go, listeners. Thanks, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for your patience. Love your work. See ya.
I don't think I ever want to talk to any of those people.
Fuck me, you guys are bastards.